Okay, today we'll be installing a Bay Manufacturing 5-inch extension onto this 2006 Yamaha 200. A little bit of history on this boat here. This is a 1989 Trophy model 2302. I bought this boat 5 or 6 years ago. Originally got it off of eBay for 2,700 bucks. Wasn't sure if it ran or anything, but I had to go pick it up in Detroit, trailer it back here to Washington. She's not real pretty, but she's solid in all the right spots and definitely gets the job done. I think last year you can see hit that with the buffer to clean up if I ever really want to, but it's a fishing boat, so doesn't really matter. I don't care if it's faded. Originally had a Bimini top on it, but first trip out to the ocean it was raining, and I think it rained more under the top than it did outside the top. So right after that trip it got that new top put on it, and then of course I added the radar arch. Anyone looking for an arch, I'd highly recommend Fish On Sports. Look them up online. They sell their arches a lot cheaper than anyone else. Most arches $2 to $3 grand. That one there was right in the $800 range. And they're definitely solid. You don't have to worry about them. They're not cheaply built or anything. This boat, when I got it, actually originally had twin 125 forces on it. Didn't know, like I said, didn't know anything about it. Just bought it on eBay, but got it back here. They were, took it down to the marina, had them go through them. Spent about $5 grand for them to go through them, and plus add a wash down and some other stuff to the boat. They ran on new cables. Motors were in good shape, being freshwater motors, and they served me for 3 or 4 years. I ran them. Nice thing about having twins on the back, if one of them goes bad, you still got the other one, as well as I always had a kicker on there too. But as with any two-strokes, they have two-stroke problems, unless you're talking a new E-Tech. But the older ones, they flood out easily and stuff. They're just kind of a pain to deal with, plus mixing the oil in the fuel and everything. And they were forces, but I gotta admit, going 30 miles out in the ocean, those motors never let me down. They always got me home. But last year, just happened to be looking online and found this motor at a marina down in Oregon, and they didn't want too much for it. I think I paid $6,500 installed with all the controls and everything. And then I sold the force motors for 500 bucks. So this motor here was mounted, installed, ready to go. $6,000, and that's pretty hard to beat for a Yamaha 200. And I'll tell you, it makes this a whole new boat. Like I say, I run this out 30 miles out in the ocean, and I don't have any problems with it. I've been out there in $100,000 boats, and I got to tell you, the $100,000 boats I've been out in aren't any more comfortable than this boat. And the difference in money buys an awful lot of beer. But getting back to this, biggest problem with this motor is, and I almost didn't buy it, but I knew the Bay kit was out there. So last year, I bought it. It's a 25-inch motor, but this older boat has a 30-inch transom. So, I had them mount this as low on the transom as I could, so I could use it at the end of the year last year. And they actually mounted it down all the way down in the bottom hole. I've actually raised it up one notch. I couldn't go more because the bottom hole is already tapped out in the groove. It's already up, so I couldn't go up any higher than that. At first I was a little mad at them for the way they put that bottom hole in there when they mounted this one on here, but found out it was mainly because of the way the transom was built and the way the inside goes down. That's the only place that really gave them any kind of area for the nut on the back side. But when I first had it on, I think last year it ran probably 3.5 inches above the bottom of the boat. The ventilation, anti-cavitation plate, whatever you want to call it, was about 3 to 3.5 inches above the bottom of the boat. And honestly, it worked fine. I didn't take it out to the ocean after this motor was put on. I just kind of used it in the inland Puget Sound waters for some local salmon fishing, and it seemed to work fine. It put the boat up on plane. The boat was able to get up to about 42 miles per hour. But it did like to, when you were trolling with it, another thing I love about this motor, 650 RPM, and it just dropped right down to a troll, and it's quiet. But when you were trolling with it, it would, you know, you would have to oversteer a lot to keep on a straight line, because I don't think the prop was quite far enough in the water, so the boat wandered a little bit back and forth. Going down to the 30 inches should fix that. Plus, when I do run it out to the ocean and, you know, you're in 10-foot swells with, you know, a couple feet of wind chop, actually preferably not too much wind chop, maybe a foot, foot and a half is a little bit better. I'd like to have that prop a little bit lower in the water. Now, being that it's a 5-inch drop, and I was only able to raise this in about 3/4 of an inch, when I'm all said and done here, I'll probably be about 1.5 inches below the bottom of the boat, which isn't necessarily ideal. You know, worst case scenario this year, I'll probably get a little extra drag and maybe some spray. If I don't like the way it performs, I'll probably end up getting a jack plate, put a jack plate on there. That way I can get the infinite adjustment up and down. You know, but I didn't think about that in time, and I'd already raised the motor, so we're going to go ahead and run it this way. Like I said, if I had thought about it sooner, I'd already have the jack plate on there. You can pick jack plates up, you know, if you're not looking for anything fancy in the, you know, $300. But let's get on to looking at this bay kit. When you order the kit, at least for this particular thing, it comes with your 5-inch extension, of course, for the housing. It's not painted. You're going to have to paint it yourself. You know, for me, I'm going to put it on unpainted right now, just because I don't have the paint here. When I get some paint, I'll throw some etching primer on it, and I'm just going to order a can of the Yamaha spray rattle can paint and put that on. At least the color will match that way. You get all your bolts that replace the original bolts, the studs that go in. One bolt with a Allen key. That is one of the center one that goes up from underneath. You get your water jacket tubes. They sent 2, depending on which size your water jacket is, which size hole it is, all the nuts. You get some pins here, the dowel pins, to make sure everything lines up correctly when you put it together. And somewhere around here is the drive shaft extension. You get the 5-inch extension. I think I was messing with the bushing on it, but it's around here somewhere. But let's get working on taking this thing apart. Here we go. Here's the old drive shaft. It you know, just slides right on the end there, right here. It'll slide right on there, and then that'll go right up into the boat. So not too much there. Get it all lubed up before we put it on there. Now obviously the first step is to get the lower unit removed. I've already done that. If you need to know how to remove the lower unit, you can look that up online. Not too terribly on a Yamaha. They're pretty simple. You just pull the little rubber bushing that's out here so you can get to that bolt, and then there's a bunch of bolts to go around the outside to pull, and then one that goes up through. You pull that one out, and the whole thing drops off. Nothing to deal with the shift mechanism or anything. There's on the Yamahas, it's just a lever that turns right there, that goes over the shift, and it turns the shift. The hardest part about doing this whole install is getting this bushing out that is actually up in here. There's a bushing that goes right here. There it is on the ground here. It sits up in there. This is the hardest thing to get out, is that bushing right there. You know, you got to get up in there, pull it out. What I actually used to pull that bushing out was actually a wall stud for sheetrock. I just used one of these right here. Actually, I ended up breaking a couple of these, and I pulled that shoved it up in there, pulled it out. Now I did have to run a screwdriver to loosen it up. I ran a screwdriver up around the edges here and just pushed a screwdriver in, just kind of break some of the old corrosion that's been around that seal, you know, to get it all broke. And then the second one of those pullers was able to pull it out after I broke. The first one broke in half, but the second one was able to pull it out after I broke that seal. So that's probably the hardest part of doing this whole conversion, is just getting that rubber seal out of that hole there. The next thing you really got to do in here is, because this shaft is wide here at the end, it won't go up through the hole there. So what you have to do is you have to get a hole saw, and you have to drill that out. It's not too terrible. It's not, you don't have to drill very far. It's about, okay, sorry there, had to break for a second, but like I said, after you get that bushing out, next thing you got to do is drill out that hole for this drive shaft to get up and go through there. Otherwise it won't go through. It's 2 inches. So you get a 1.5 inch hole saw and just kind of mount it, kind of like that one, on a threaded rod. Or excuse me, that's 1 1/8 inches, and then 1 inch hole saw turned backwards the other way and just locked together with 2 nuts. And you can drill it right up through there. But honestly, you could probably don't even need the other inch saw as a pilot hole, because when I drilled it out, it actually ended up being only about maybe 1/8 of an inch that you have to drill through. And it, you know, it took me literally less than 5 minutes to drill that out. I thought that was going to be a harder part, but as it turns out, the bushing was the hardest part. But now this thing just slides right up and in there. Now the hardest part's going to be when I put that all back in. You know, they say, you know, the instructions call for you to put this bushing back in there. From what I found, a lot of people are just leaving that bushing out. They're not putting it back in. But my bushing's in pretty good shape still. So you know, if it wasn't in good shape, I would probably leave it out also. But since it's in good shape and I have it, you know, I'm going to go ahead and put it back in. The one thing I'm going to have to do to put it in is I'm going to have to, because the shaft won't go through the bushing either. So I'm going to have to set the shaft up in there, which it is set up in there fine. And then I'll have to put the bushing in, and then I'll have to push the drive shaft up in there with the bushing. But a lot of guys are leaving the bushing out. I don't know if the bushing really does anything. It sits so low on this shaft. It comes all the way down by the water pump. So it's not really holding anything from moving back and forth. Plus it's got quite a bit of play in it. I mean, if your shaft bends enough that bushing is catching it from hitting the case or anything, then I think you probably got more problems than just a bushing. So anyways, let's get on to moving on with the rest of this install here. I already got the hole drilled. I got the bushing out. The next thing would be to check the studs where they all go, because you want to make sure they all thread in. So we'll do that in just a sec. All right, so getting back here on this out drive, what we got to do, they want you to do is they want you to check all these studs and make sure that they go in to these holes, that they thread in good and that they're clean. They all just kind of thread in. These studs are actually screwed. They got different threads on each end. One side is for the nut, the other side is for the holes. But you want to make sure that they go all the way in. You want to make sure that these will bury here. The threads in, they're tapered. These are not something, when we go to put them in, they'll be used with red Loctite. But they do want you to make sure they go in. So they want you to clean the holes. And I found the best way to clean those holes out is I just actually used brake clean on them, because you don't want to when you put your red Loctite in there, you don't want any oil or anything like that in there. It will contaminate the Loctite and it won't perform the way it's supposed to. So, you know, if you can get it cleaned out, the best. I actually cleaned mine out by just taking some brake clean, and I just really just sprayed them down good, and it just blew everything out. Obviously I've done all the holes already, and then I made sure that the studs would screw all the way in. They say in the instructions to make sure you use channel locks or vice grips to thread these in, especially when you're putting them in. They don't want you to use the double nut feature on it because you can over tighten them and possibly crack your thing. However, putting those in with channel locks is just kind of really a pain. So I think you just use a little common sense. Of course, when I did it, I double nutted them because I did the first one with channel locks and said enough of that BS. Let's go ahead and put a double nut on. When I double nut, I like to put a washer in between. Only reason is it just makes it easier to keep, if you're using different wrenches on your bolts that way. You don't slip off. The washer kind of separates it and keeps you from slipping off. Basically, though, you want to get this thing threaded in. Make sure that the things go all the way in. Gotta be throwing wrenches around, I guess, huh? Just want to make sure that this thing threads all the way in and that those go out. Because if they don't, then what you want to do is you're going to want to tap them. But all mine are threading in good. They're all threading all the way in. So now I guess I'll go around, make sure that they're all good, and then put red Loctite on them. But first thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get that bushing back up in there with that drive shaft. So let me get this out of here, and we'll get that small piece of the drive shaft kind of lubed in the splines and set up in there, and we'll get that bushing pressed up in there real quick. Okay, so I got that bushing back up in there. You can see it up in there, along with the C-clip that holds it in. The drive shaft extension is sitting up there waiting for me to push the rest of the unit together. Now I know that's going to be a pain in the butt to get that drive shaft lined up with those splines and pushed together while also lining it up with the upper one. Like I said, if my bushing wasn't in good shape, I probably wouldn't have put it in there. But it was in good shape, so you know, can't hurt anything to have it in there, and I'm not gonna not do something just because it's harder. So we'll just take on the challenge of getting the two to line up. But like I said, for that bushing costs like 80 bucks, and if mine wasn't in good shape, I would probably not put it in, as there's a lot of people running without them. So the next thing we do is I'll just get all those studs put into the holes with the red Loctite, get them all set at the proper depth, and then we'll go forward from there. Okay, so we got all the bolts in, or the studs in. Like I said, I used the double nut method, even though they recommend against using it, but I just don't like cranking them all down with things. Just, you know, use a little common sense when you're putting it on there and just kind of hand tighten it. You know, you're not going to crank down on it. You just want them up there, you know, snugged in there, not cranked. You don't want to crack your case. And also, I was mistaken, the two tubes, I thought they were both water tubes, but the bigger one is the water tube. The smaller one is actually the speedometer tube. It's optional. You don't have to have it. Some engines don't have it, but it's got a speedometer tube and the water tube. So the next thing to do, I guess, is to get the middle section and slide it up in there. Now they do want you to use some silicone around the exhaust flanges, just kind of keep it so that it doesn't leak out. You know, you just use some RTV silicone, you know, you get out at the auto parts store, preferably high temp. I'm not sure if high temp is really that much required, since when you're running this thing it should be down in the water and staying cool anyways. But you know, we'll put some high temp RTV on there, and in that section and where it goes together, and we'll get that slid on there. Okay, so we're back. Got all the studs put in. Got both the speedo, the water pump, and the gear shift selector, which I didn't have in there last time I had this video on. Plus I went ahead and put some marine grease on all the studs you know, just to kind of keep the corrosion down. It's probably not going to make a lot of difference because I'm probably going to be pulling the lower unit off every year, make sure it's all serviced in there and stuff. But still, never hurts to have a little extra protection. Pretty much ready for the spacer to go up in there, but when I was checking the fit over here on the lower unit, just to make sure everything fits good, if you look down inside here, let's see if I can get a better light on it. If you look down inside, there's that rubber gasket for the exhaust, the factory rubber gasket. Now, that gasket, because it's raised right there and it's made to go into the recessed part in here, it causes this to not sit flush on there. But if you take that gasket and you remove it, it's raised right here. If you take it out and you remove it, you also have nothing holding this little plate in here. And then with the piece on here, if you look down in there, you got a gap in between on the water side here. You have a gap right there, down there. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a gap in the in between this side and this side. There's still a gap there even with the rubber there, but it's less of a gap. Now I'm not sure how much difference that actually is going to make. This whole section is in the water, but with that there, exhaust would be able to come up into this chamber. Actually, it would be pushing down, so it would have to go down and it would have to bubble back through the water, but it still leaves an opening there. It's kind of a poor, one of the few poor designs of this whole kit. What I'm probably going to do is take this gasket here and I'm going to trim it off so that it sits flush, so that at least that can sit flush with this pin here, with this plate, and it'll block most of it. And then hopefully when I put the RTV silicone on it, I'll lay an extra thick bead of silicone along there that should cover most of the gap there. So that's what I'm going to do. Like I said, it wouldn't cost Bay Manufacturing much to actually have a gasket made that fits that and covers that hole. I don't know why they don't. I guess that's what keeps this, makes this an average kit instead of being a great kit. But short of going to Yamaha and buying all the parts separate, getting an actual shaft, it would cost a lot more. I guess they're pretty much the only game in town. So you got to kind of take the good with the bad. Anyways, let me move on, get that trimmed up, and then we'll show it all kind of how it fits together. Okay, so here's my trimmed down piece of rubber, the gasket. I kind of just cut it off where it comes to the edges there, just so that it will be held down by the spacer. Here's that metal piece right here, kind of sets down in here, and then this will set on here like this. What I'll do is I'm also going to put silicone, and I'm going to silicone this metal piece down on the edges, just to make sure it doesn't come up. But at least now we can put the top on, and it will sit, once you hit those alignment dowels, it'll sit flush down in there. And now if you look down in there, we don't have a gap. Well, there's just that slight one in between the wall and the bottom. So like I said, I don't know if it really matters, really needs it, since it's all in the water and the exhaust is going down. But can't hurt to make sure that it's still blocked off, like be complete. Like I say, they call for just siliconing around there and siliconing around the bottom with high temp. So that's what I'll do. And now we should be ready. I'll put a little grease on the shifter lever there. Make sure that it's greased up. A little bit of grease right around the bottom right here where it goes through that bushing. And I think ready to get this lower unit held up on there and bolted up, and hopefully it won't be too hard to get that lined up there in that with the other drive shaft extension that's up in there. It's all greased and ready, so everything's ready other than putting some silicone on here and seeing about bolting this thing together. So I think we'll get to it. All right, we're back. There it is, all pushed up on there, siliconed around the exhaust ports. It actually slides together pretty easy. Recommend definitely is easier with two people. Luckily I had someone come by. They gave me a hand. It helps one person sliding it up while the other person's just trying to make sure that those little tubes align right, the little shift lever aligns right, but it slides together fine. It wasn't as bad. I thought it was going to be harder to line up that second, that little drive shaft extension, since I had it up already set and kind of in there above that bushing, but the drive shaft just slid together nice and easy, and everything went in there pretty good. These are all torqued down 35 foot-pounds. I believe that's what it calls for. So they're all torqued in there right. Obviously I already got the prop on it. Cleaned all the silicone off with the stuff that squeezed out, cleaned it off with acetone. I want to make sure you get that all cleaned off before it dries if you want to paint this, because stuff doesn't like to stick to silicone, so the sooner you can get that cleaned off the better. Acetone usually does a pretty good job on it. Like I said, I'm going to put an etching primer on it first anyways, but lower it down here. See how she kind of lines up. I did lower the front of the boat, so that will help it not hit the ground since it's so much longer. But it looks like, cavitation plate is pretty good. It's probably, like I said, inch and a half low. We'll see how it works this year, and said if I don't like it, I'll just get the jack plate and put on there. And like I said, those jack plates, you can get them $300, a little bit less. I've seen them cheaper, as long as you get a plain one, and the plain ones with just the simple 5 inches up down adjustment should work fine on there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Pretty simple kit to do. A few flaws in the kit, but other than that, pretty easy to put on. Like I said, helps to have a second person, but we'll see how it works.